Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest reports of Conservative MPs making a push for their party to get behind removing the UK from the European Convention on Human Rights. It's been called a second Brexit, and with good reason, just like the campaign to leave the EU has nothing to do with making the UK stronger, certainly has nothing to do with giving us more say. It's making us weaker for their profit. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So this is another one of those cases where the right wing are breaking irony meters and going full hypocrisy. They try to make the remembrance events this weekend about defending freedoms. It's got nothing to do with defending freedoms, of course. It's about remembering those who fell because politicians failed or deliberately set fire to the world. Some happened to be defending our freedoms when they fell. Others fell for no sensible reason at all. Politicians sent them to die, and off they went and died. But it also has to be noted that many of the loudest voices of those insisting that this is about remembering those who defended our freedoms are on the right. And when they're not banging on about defending freedoms, they're actually arguing very aggressively that we should be dismantling those freedoms. On Armistice Day, they're arguing that a march calling for armistice should be banned. But that is not enough for them. They're also raising their calls to dismantle our fundamental freedoms altogether in the form of the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, yesterday, in my usual Friday stream with Graham on the Labour Social channel, I said that when it comes to rights legislation, I think it should be international, not domestic. I don't trust domestic legislation for this. Domestic laws in most countries, certainly in the UK, are decided by a single political group. And it can change every 10 years as we move from one political group to the other being in power. You know, sometimes it's a group I approve of, and sometimes it most definitely is not. But it's still a single group. International rights laws are agreed by a wide consensus, right across the political spectrum. Can be no other way. At any given time, there's going to be a wide range of political views leading the most influential nations in the world who essentially have to agree it. The end result is that when they do manage to agree something, it really does tend to be universally good. The European Convention on Human Rights is a powerful international agreement which arose out of a situation that shocked humanity to its core. It was a proper never again moment. It set out a series of articles that provides fundamental human rights to us all. And these days, we do regard them as rights. We regard them as inalienable rights, but they're not. They can be removed. Those arguing for them to be removed, unsurprisingly, the same ones who urged us to leave the EU, are using immigration to do so. Again, they've got no imagination. This should be a warning sign for people. If their Brexit didn't actually solve the immigration problems like they said it would, and in actual fact only made it worse by their own admission, then why would people listen to their next scheme? The reality is, of course, has nothing to do with immigration. These people don't care about immigration. They actually quite like it. It's a load of people that are quite vulnerable that they can exploit. No, they want to extract that sort of profit from the rest of us. Rights to family life, for example, prevents them arguing that if we've got shortages of workers on the fields, we should be able to uproot unemployed people from their homes, force them 200 miles away to live in a tent whilst picking crops under forced labour terms for slave wages. Freedom of expression means that their shady practices can be challenged. They've done well in muting a lot of criticism. They've bought up most of the mainstream media. They control much of the rest. Case in point, right-wing presenters, journalists, whatever, they are allowed to campaign as politically as they like. They can be as explicitly political as they like in their own private lives, no problem at all. Carol Vorderman joins a political campaign, even though her BBC work itself is apolitical and completely dissociated from it. Oh, and she's sacked. But that's enough for them. Or not enough for them, sorry. You know, they want total control. They don't have that. Removing these rights doesn't cut both ways as well. They know that those with the money and the power are almost exclusively of far-right wing thinking. They know that removing basic human rights doesn't put them in jeopardy because it creates a law of the jungle where the richest and most powerful thrive. Well, that's them. You notice there were never any Brexit campaigns or campaigns to leave the European Convention headed up by ordinary people. There are lots of political campaigns for lots of issues. You've got campaigns to tackle hunger, poverty in general, corporate greed, to promote strengthening human rights. campaigning against environmental damage. Plenty of grassroots campaigns set up by ordinary people living ordinary lives, alongside others that were set up by wealthy philanthropists as well, of course, yes. But you will always find in amongst things like that, things that are good, you will find ordinary, genuinely grassroots organisations. Brexit campaign groups to remove our human rights, there are no grassroots campaigns for these, not one. 100% of them are set up and run by people who went to private school. They con ordinary people to joining in, of course. They need people to stand on the street with a placard. But none of these campaigns were ever set up and organised by an ordinary citizen. And in terms of this move to eject us from the European Convention on Human Rights, which of course actually means exiting the Council of Europe, and join Russia and Belarus, is not an immediate threat, of course. There's no way the Tories can arrange this before the election. And there's another safety measure as well. The Irish peace process is built upon the Convention on Human Rights. The Good Friday Agreement simply evaporates if we leave. Now, there are those who would not mind that in the slightest. But consider the international reaction, especially from the United States. And this isn't a case of waiting for the Republicans to get into power. This is not a partisan issue in the US. In fact, even when the orange one was still president, the Tories were being warned really very clearly about any Brexit move that would destabilise Northern Ireland. Those warnings came from the White House as much as Capitol Hill. Northern Ireland makes Brexit difficult, and still does. It makes leaving the European Convention on Human Rights impossible. So before they can even think about doing that, they'd need to reunify Ireland. Well, setting aside the horrific consequences, it would be interesting to see the Tory party formally dropping their support for unionism if they decide to pursue this path, and they happily will. They've shown with Brexit that they will actually risk the integrity of the UK. They've got no problems with that. And they would have to. So how realistic is it? I think we should take it very seriously. You know, I keep saying that if you think back to 1996, 1997, there was a burgeoning pro-Brexit movement. There were various groups forming. They were quite disorganised at the time. We'd just elected the most pro-European government in decades. But the idea festered in the Tory party. You know, by the time they returned to power, that movement had become more organised and they'd actively infiltrated the Conservative Party. You know, there were MPs there that came to power in 2010 who had been in UKIP. And it's like, look, you get yourself in the Conservative Party, get yourself elected to Parliament in the Conservative Party because we're going to need people on the inside. So they did that. That's how they organised over that last period of Labour government. Within a few years of them coming back to power, they got their wish. That's all it took. It was just a few years because they were already ready. They knew what they were doing. They had the people in place. Well, it's the same movement wanting us out of the European Convention and for the same reason. So they're already there. They don't have to infiltrate anymore. They're already there. They want to weaken the UK for their own profit. And we have very little to defend ourselves against it. Northern Ireland cannot be relied upon as like our trump card, if you'll pardon the expression, because you would think reunification will happen at some point, probably more quickly as a result of both Brexit and the main unionist voice becoming, you know, unicorn chasers. The past few years has shown that we have very few checks and balances. Our electoral system is very weak. That needs changing. Our media regulation is very weak. That needs changing. We allow those with wealth to have too much influence over national debates. Referenda are always won by those with the most money. And they've also learned something. They've learned how to get a population to vote against its own interests, using very clever, very insidious technology to make mad ideas seem like actually it's supported by experts on social media. We all know about the false equivalence on the BBC with the Brexit debate. We all know about the targeted Facebook ads, you know, the Cambridge Analytica work as well. They've learned all those techniques now. We have little legislation protecting us from a future use of it in that form. You know, so this is very worrying. It's not an immediate threat, but that should not lessen the concern. After the election, while Labour are in power, they'll be organising in the Conservative Party, just as they did last time. Just because this latest period of Tory destruction is coming to an end is no reason to relax. Some of the damage is long-term enough to be considered permanent, and they have further plans to break us yet. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.